Hey, welcome. I'm so excited for you to join us today. We have a special occasion. My husband, Eric Wanous, is a veteran teacher and he is on spring break this week. Woo woo!
Yes. Woo.
Spring break, exciting. And that gives us an opportunity to share with you. Oh my gosh, we have not done this in probably 3, maybe even 4 years. So
No, I
I've
think
been doing
five.
these. I've been doing these lives for a really long time, and I have been doing our podcast weekly for actually about 5 years now. And we probably haven't done that in a really long time. So I'm really excited for us to do that today. And Eric is going to share with you a little bit about what is actually happening in classrooms today. It's been quite a journey in the last 6 years, especially in the classrooms. And for us that are homeschoolers, it is, we don't often know what goes on in the classroom. And so a lot of people are thinking about homeschooling. You might be here because you have started homeschooling and you're like, man, I don't know. I just want to make sure I made the right choice for my child. And just want to give it a little insight. You might be here because you're just darn curious about what the heck happens in school in the first place. And that might be just trust me, it's fascinating. I'm just telling you, it's interesting. I hear stories every single day about stuff that's happening in schools, and it is crazy. Crazy. There are some good things. We're going to talk about good things. We're going to talk about the bad things. We're going to talk about the ugly things. But the point of this is to give you an assessment, a clearer picture. Now, granted, this is from evidence from one school in one area, but I have been talking to y'all for a very long time all across the country. I talk with parents every single day, and I have a very good sense that what is happening in Eric's school, what is happening in the districts there, is a lot of what's happening around the country. So you can take every school will vary, every school is going to be different, every district's going to be different, every state's going to be different. However, I am seeing a common thread in all the things that Eric's going to talk about today and that we're going to talk about in this arena, in this school arena, all across the country. So this is going to kind of be like a little bit of a kitchen table chat, if you will. I'm going to chime in a little bit there and here and there, and let's just hope we can keep this under 30 minutes. But we'll see how it goes. You guys, if you're watching this live, even if you're watching in a replay, go ahead and comment some questions if you have questions in the chat, and we'll try and see if we can get to those. But I think we're going to cover a lot of ground today. So this is going to be really exciting from all the things that we hear from parents and what Eric's seeing in the classroom from a teacher standpoint. And he's been teaching for a really long time. We actually met teaching.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I was 22. Hello, super young. And granted, he was the only one in my range, in my age bracket, I'm just kidding. It was the only reason why we actually only both worked at that school 1 year, and that was the reason.
Yep.
That was why we were there. We just needed to meet. So that's okay. And Eric has gone on to keep teaching. I taught for 7 years, and that was before my son was born, so it was a bit ago. But I do get updates from you guys all the time about what's happening across the schools. So Eric's been teaching for 28 years now. It's like really crazy. He's almost ready to retire.
Yeah.
I mean, got to get out of that school schedule, right? You feel me, moms, right? Got to get out of that school schedule. All right, you guys, we're going to jump into this. I'm really excited about this conversation. Honestly, we have some ideas we're going to talk about, but I don't know where this is going to go. So I'm really excited about it. And I want Eric to introduce himself just a little bit and just kind of share what he's been teaching over the years in his 28-year career, and just why this is so important for parents to know today. So, Eric, take it away.
So I've, like Kevin says, I've taught for a long time now. It's actually more like 30 years, but full-time employment's been about 28. I started in another part in California, and I've taught in different places in the state. And majority of my career, it's been a lot of things. Taught fourth grade briefly. Taught in high school for years. I've always been in the language arts, English area. Taught high school for years. Like I said, that was where Cam said that's where we met. And I've been in the middle school now for 17, I think going on to my 18th year now. Started at English language arts. I taught all grade levels 6 through 8. And now I've moved into something completely different. I teach ELD. I've taught everything from, that's English language development. These are for students that speak a language other than English, which I've had a variety of languages through the years. And there's 4 different levels in there as they progress through the years of elementary school, or excuse me, through middle school. They would go through different levels. And so I've taught from 1 through 4, and level 1 is called newcomers. And that's where I've been teaching the last 3 years, which is interesting because when I started, I spoke very little Spanish, which is the majority of most of my students, either all or in this case, almost all of them speak Spanish. So I have a translator, and she's wonderful. We form a very good team. And as I've taught this now for years, it's really forced me to get better at my Spanish. And so if my translator is not there, every now and then she'll miss a day. I'm on my own with students that have very little knowledge of English. And so, it's caused me to continue to grow and get better as a teacher. This year I have Arabic students, which is something I hadn't had till the very beginning of my career. I had some Arabic students, Arabic speaking students. And so then the other thing I teach is STEM and Lego robotics. And I've been doing that for, over 10 years now. So a very varied career, and I feel very blessed to be able to teach the variety of things I do, which keeps it interesting for me, challenges me to grow. And I would say the middle school where I teach is probably typical of average California middle school, grade 6, 7, and 8. That's how most are. There's very few junior colleges, or junior high schools, which would be 7 and 8 in California. And then the school that the district I'm in is a smaller district, but again, I think it's very typical of what you would see in any middle school.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very typical. And what's really interesting is that when we send our kids to school, so we're sending our kids to school, we don't know what's really going on there. So we don't know what's happening inside the classrooms and what the environment is like necessarily. We hear some things from our kids, but we don't know the full picture. And that's why I think this is really important for y'all today, because this is something that's going to really shed light on the landscape of what's happening in schools today. And one of the first things I know that is a really huge topic for us today, I mean, they've had congressional hearings about it. They've had researchers. There's lots of people talking about screens. And with our kids today, with them having, most of the kids have phones, they have some sort of personal device, and then they have their laptops that they're given by the school, their chromebooks to be able to do work on. And that is something that parents have often even pulled their kids out for homeschooling, because they're like, man, they're just on too many screens. In fact, I talked to a parent not that long ago, and he was saying he has his kids in school, and he's like, they spend a good 4+ hours in school a day on their phone, or I'm sorry, on their laptops, and then they come home and they do homework on their laptops. And so then there's the phones and everything. So Eric and I were talking yesterday a little bit about how the role of screens and how that affects learning, the social aspect. And so I want to have Eric touch on that a little bit. And can you just talk about what are the screens? What are the effective screens in schools, that there's so many? What do you think that is? We talked about a little bit about their thinking stuff, and then also social too.
Yeah, in fact, it was interesting. I'm off this week, and so I was able to look at some different things that I normally don't have time to. And so I was looking at, it was actually a report from, I believe it was National Education Association, and they were talking about the various effects that young people being on screens such a majority of their time. And so they said one of the biggest things is that young people these days, they don't have the capacity to just sit and not just that kind of quiet. There's downtime. It looks very different than what other people might think, especially older generations might think downtime is. They're instantly going to something else for that stimulation because they're used to, constantly being entertained. So they said their capacity to just sit. So like to have my students sit there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes while I'm taking roll, maybe announcements are happening, students are maybe coming in late for whatever reason. they're already getting antsy in 2 to 3 minutes because there's nothing to entertain them, and just sitting in their desk with, they're waiting to get instructions or whatever. That's difficult for some students, especially when you think we have so many students these days that have maybe special learning needs. They might be attention deficit. They might be a hyperactive disorder. We have a whole range of students that are on the spectrum. And so there's kind of a lot going on for, maybe an 11-year-old that thinks, I'm waiting forever for Mr. Wanous to get going or whatever. And so then they also find that once they get into maybe working on a computer, because my class actually has a lot of screens, and Lego robotics, our curriculum is on the computer. When they're building a robot, they're programming the robot. So there is screens abound in my classroom. But they find that when students are asked to do something on the computer, if it's not super high engagement, they'll lose interest in it. And then they also find that if they're asked to do more of even if it's it can all be set up on the computer, if that's especially how your curriculum, a lot of the curriculum it's already there. They have to go on their computer to access it. Like the days of books in the classroom, that really doesn't exist by and large. And so if they're asked to do more of a complex, maybe multi-step, they have to do deep thinking, things that require them to kind of spend time contemplating, formulating answers, they find that that's something that today's students are having really challenges doing, that because they're so used to instant gratification, things that have a lot of bells and whistles going off. This may not be there in some of that curriculum. And so I know as an educator, I have to think carefully about what I'm giving to my students, and is it engaging for them? So not necessarily dumbing down what we do, but maybe looking carefully at how we do it, and can we still do those things that require more intellectual time and intellectual effort and ability by students. The other big thing is talk about Cami mentioned about, they might have every student has a Chromebook. It's issued by the district. But there are some students that every now and then they'll bring a tablet. That's rare though, but you think they probably have a tablet somewhere at home, maybe not theirs, but maybe a family tablet. And then almost all of them have a phone. I would say, gosh, I'd have to put it at 80+%. It's hard to say. And I say that because before we used to have very lax policies with phones, especially when not as many students had them. And just the policies weren't, I guess maybe they didn't think it needed to be so strict. But the last couple of years, we've gone into a thing where your phone is away and in a backpack. And it's made a huge difference, because if they have a phone out, I can take it and keep it for the remainder of the period. And if it's a repeated problem, I'm going to turn it into the office, and it has to get picked up by a parent. So because that, the threat of losing it, and then your parents have to get involved to get it back, it really keeps kids, they're off it. They do have the opportunity in my and other classes, they can ask to get it out for certain things. So in my class, it may be appropriate to pull out their phone if they want to take a picture of the robot they're working on. They might want to take a picture of the programming that's on their screen, because that may not get saved. They might also want to make a video of their robot, because oftentimes the robot does actions and they want to show their parents or their friends what their robot did. And then sometimes we need to time things. Some of the programming or the challenges we do are time challenge. So they'll want to say, can I pull up my phone because it has a timer on it? And they're usually pretty good about, when they're done with whatever they're using their phone for, putting it away. But yes, we've noticed a huge increase. And they say then when kids, if they're not they get the lag time between them being engaged, and then if they're asked to do more of a complex learning task, or if what they're doing on the computer is not engaging, or if they don't have that computer out, they find that kind of downtime without something that they can, take their attention or something to do, that's when they find the behavior problems.
And that's what you're finding too, right? I mean, if they don't have something like entertaining them every second, then we get mischievousness happening.
There's other things going on at my school that are probably leading to that as well. But yes, I have the last 2 years, I've had a massive increase in behavioral problems that in the realm of discipline. Kids fighting, kids disrupting, kids, they just don't know what to do with themselves. And so they kind of get into trouble. And it's on the rise. And it's not just for me, it's across the board. We talk about it as a staff. all the time.
Yeah, and even as a male teacher, so oftentimes when we're in the classrooms like female teachers, we see a different behavior sometimes with kids than with a male teacher because it's just a different dynamic. And it's just it's normal. It's just something kids do. And so for them to be doing that in Eric's classroom where there is a lot, he has amazing classroom management. It's not for lack of having classroom management, and he has obviously a lot of experience doing that. It's just something that kids are really, and he even said, came home the other day and you said the kids who you would think would never be suspended for violence or whatever are being suspended, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, like little, very, in some ways, timid sixth graders, getting suspended for, the language is something like threatening to cause violence or causing violence, or even threatening school personnel, and it's across the board. The school that I teach in, we've got a wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, multimillionaire families down to families that are just struggling, to get by. It's across the board. And then, the behavior, I see things this year that I've never had before in teaching. I had a boy, another boy decided to wrestle my new classroom. I'm in a new room this year. It's very long. It's like 40 feet long. I'm in one side of the room, and the other side of the room, I hear something happen. It's so far away, and I've got kids around me I can't see. They decided to wrestle in the back of the room. One kid hit his head on a piece of furniture, and he eventually had to get 4 staples in his head, and I had to stop his head from bleeding. It was kind of a tense moment. I've never had kids get into a wrestling situation that resulted in a pretty significant injury. Luckily, everything worked out fine. And the young man is back to in a very good shape now. But yeah, I never would have guessed something like that would have happened. And
Yeah,
the other thing, and I do need to add also, my Lego robotics class and my STEM classes, they're 90% boys, and
yeah,
so this is something that's been
middle school
across
boys,
the
man.
board. Yeah, so I've had classes where I have no girls, so there is that higher boy population, which creates a different tone and atmosphere to my
Yeah.
room. Think like a shop class in days of old.
And
The
they
modern day
move
version of a
around.
shop.
They're not always just seated and stuff
Oh
too. So
yeah,
yeah.
we're moving
Yeah.
around the room for what we do with the robots now.
Yeah. So thinking about how the classroom behavior is changing even more, I've heard about that in so many places all over the country. There's been a rise in even articles and teachers complaining to districts that they're in danger in their classrooms, that they go in and stuff is getting broken all the time, that kids are throwing things or they're breaking things, and their classroom's an absolute disaster when when school's done, or even violence to the teacher. So this is a common thread in the last 6 years for sure, and since we've come back to school after COVID. And so one of the things I talk to parents a lot about is the kids who come back after COVID. What difference have you seen in the kids who experience distance learning to, how did that affect them in the classroom and their behavior and the way that they learn?
Yeah, you're talking about going back to the pandemic, how things are different
Yeah,
now as opposed to
right. Because these
pre-pandemic.
kids were distance learners, these kids now. Yeah.
Right. And when I think back to distance learning, I'm like, oh my God, that was such a huge failure. It was really difficult to, for so many different reasons. I'm not going to go back through all that. Um, Nowadays, well, again, it's the march of technology. So at that time, they were still trying to get computers to everybody. It seems odd that, that just 6 years ago or so, 5, 6 years ago, they all didn't have Chromebooks, especially at the lower levels. So I remember if they were in elementary, they maybe didn't have a Chromebook at the time. And so there was a mass push to get the technology out to students. And there was a large learning curve for how do we work with this technology. And so now it's like that technology, I would like to say it's more seamless, but it's interesting because in some areas it went back the other way. My newcomer ELD students, I do have an online component that I used to teach from, so I can put the lesson we're working on a large TV in my room, which is actually really helpful. And I can type on the screen while we're working, but they actually work out of physical books. So when I said we got away from books, yeah, in some ways we did, but we brought them back. So my students have workbooks, and then in math, their curriculum is a workbook. With my ELD students, one of the things I do with them is I help them with their core classes: math, science, social studies, um, and I'm missing one there, but they have trouble accessing their core curriculum because they're missing the language component there. Most of the teachers are not speaking Spanish for their instruction. Maybe some are doing a mix. Maybe some not at all. It depends on the teacher's proficiency, and their materials may or may not be fully translated into Spanish. And
Well, for the
so,
regular kids, we have like I've heard, and this is true from a lot of different families that I've talked to everywhere. And there was even an article that I don't even remember where I read it, but it was one of the a huge public, I think it was like the New Yorker or something like that. They did a whole article on how their books in high schools, there aren't books that the kids aren't reading full works anymore. And so they're not reading like a whole book. Not just necessarily say that they have to be reading whole books, but they need to be reading whole works so that they can get a context view of what's happening. I think I talked about this in another episode, but the limitation of what they're doing is that they're teaching kids what's happening on a test. They're teaching little bits of what's happening on the test. So on a test, you get a little excerpt and then you have to answer questions. So what they're doing in the classroom is they're doing that instead of doing a whole work and exploring depth and context and all this relevant information that could be discussed about lots of different things in the world. They're not being taught that because they're doing this test thing. So I do want to make sure that like there's a wide range of things happening, but there are places where we are going back to books and places where they're just not existent anymore.
no, I have to agree with you there. In terms of text, there are a lot of times they're finding it's a digital version of a book, so they don't actually have a physical book. And for those old English teachers, I see Cam nodding there. We want kids to have a physical book that you can read. I don't see kids from the other classes. I make sure my newcomers have a physical book, but the other teachers aren't going in the library like I am. And so if they're reading, like, let's say George London's The Build a Fire, an amazing short story, it's probably in a digital version they've put into what we call the Google Classroom. It's easy for a teacher to do, so I understand why they're doing it. And every kid can access it. They don't have to find a book. They might lose their book. But there's a lot of things that are going digitally like that. And then, like she says, there's always that effort to teach to the test. The tests that we took as kids, that you got a paper test and you had the bubbles to fill, those went away a long time ago. So what they do is they give them short excerpts. I mean, they're like a half a page. Even my newcomers do this. It's a half a page, maybe a page and a half. It's as long as the text they're going to have them read. And then they have to ask questions about that short text. And they are actually composing their answer in a text answer box on the computer. And so, yeah, there is an effort by teachers to kind of give the students a fighting chance or get good
And that
scores on
pressure
that.
doesn't necessarily come from the teacher, because teachers don't want to do that. Teachers want
Yeah.
to teach actual learning, but it comes from the districts, it comes from the schools. I talked to a student at our dojo recently. She is a middle schooler, actually, and she said that she used to homeschool and she's back at school now, and she's so irritated because they've taken the practice test for the state test 4 times.
Not
And
surprised.
it's a lot. And she's like, I don't even know what's the point. Like, this doesn't mean anything anyway. And I could be learning other things because she actually really loves to learn. So she's really frustrated. And that's something that I feel like is a really big detriment to, because school's a business. School's a business. So they want people to come to the schools and they're trying to get good ratings, and how they get
Yep.
good ratings with the test scores, right? So, and there's a lot of other things that go into the ratings, but that's one of those things. So I want to definitely talk about the aspect of the budgetary things, because this is happening nationwide. The loss of veteran teachers, and because they're too expensive, because they cost more, because they have more years. And I want to talk about what effect that's having. We're having school closures everywhere, all across the United States. And it's not just from homeschooling. It's not just from homeschooling. We've had a significant decrease in birth rates for the last at least 10 years. And so that's having a huge effect on, and that's worldwide, by the way, but that's having a huge effect on our schools. And so what are they doing now, and how is that budget issue affecting the way that learning happens, and the environments, the attitudes of the schools and the teachers?
Yeah, to give you a little historical context, in the smaller district where I teach, we had two middle schools. And when I started 17 years ago, 18 years ago, we had about 525 students at our middle school. And the other school, I'm assuming, had a similar amount. So over 1,000 middle schoolers in our town.
They might even have
And
had more, because it's a bigger school over there.
yeah, that's why I say I'm guessing their population was that. That school could have had a higher population of students because it was the original middle school, and it was originally made for, I think, about 600 to 700 students. So that went along for a long time, and then we saw the effects of declining enrollment. And so finally, we had so few middle school students, they said, well, we could save a ton of money by consolidating schools. The district has a long time had a hard time figuring out how to make their budgets work. Less students means less money. This is basically the way the formula works. And so how can we continue so they obviously cut teachers. I noticed that my school, we went down from over 30 teachers. I think at the end we were down to like 24. And then they said, well, we need to make our numbers work. Otherwise, if you don't make your numbers work in California, the state or the county takes you over, and that's like the worst thing ever. So they said, well, we need to close the school. And we tried to fight it because we didn't think it was going well. We pictured the chaos. That was why they had made two schools, because there had been so much chaos at the larger school. We're like, well, we're just going to start that all over again. And they said the numbers don't support it. And so after 17 years, they closed our school, and the teachers that taught there, we were heartbroken. And so now we're in our first year of a combined middle school, and there have been a lot of hurdles. All the students in one place. We went from 4 administrators down to 2, and there had long been it wasn't just the kids from they're basically, the schools are on polar opposite ends of town. We were in one corner and they're in another corner. There were very economic differences between the two schools. One end of town had been very affluent, the other end of town not so much. But the philosophy in terms of the teachers, we would go over there, or they would come over to our school for meetings, and we would be talking about students and curriculum. There was quite a divide in the attitudes of the teachers between the two schools. And I would like to think it was the teachers were trying to have their populations, which in some ways were different, even though the students could choose to go to either school, were very different. So we've had a lot of trouble, just figuring out where's the middle here. And then the students, now you've got all these students, and there's very little supervision in a very large campus. And I think that is what is leading to quite a bit of the behavior issues when they are out of the rooms, which is a significant portion of the day, over an hour between break and lunch. There's just not enough bodies and people to kind of police what they're doing. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons we're having is some of the behavior problems we're having. But this isn't just something that's happening in my district. It's happening all over. I hear all the districts around us. They're all grappling with this. They're all consolidating schools. I've heard of, Cam and I started in Santa Rosa. I think they had 5, I believe it was, high schools at one point. I think they're down to 2 or 3. And so, you got to think of not just the kids, not just they've got so many more students that they interact with, but you think of just the hurdles of getting to a school. It takes us 15 minutes to get across town because now everyone's trying to go down one road basically to get to the school. So there's other stressors. We have a lot more kids showing up tardy because everyone's trying to get on the campus in the morning, and there's only one place to drop off your students. And so it adds a lot of other stressors. Kids can't get their lunch in a timely fashion because there are so many students in the cafeteria. And now that everybody gets a free lunch, everyone's getting food. So there's a lot of things that you don't think about until it actually happens. And then you realize, oh, this is way more complicated than we would have thought. And it's not just stress on teachers and staff, it's also stressors on the students as well.
Yeah, and some of the times the students don't necessarily integrate well with each other too, because there's like a certain mood, tone, and a landscape at one school, and then the other school. And in your case, that was very, very true. And they don't necessarily meet really well. And then and the also the expectation, the learning expectations were
Very
much
different.
higher at your school, at your older
Yeah.
school, and then a little bit lower at the other school. And so
Yeah.
that creates a difference in the learning expectations campus wide, and
Exactly.
as far as the goals for the district and the goals for the school and the goals for the students. So you have, like you said yesterday, one classroom, some teachers are doing some things where they permitted this, and then the other teachers are not so much. So
Yeah.
that creates a miscommunication for the kids, and it's confusing. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to talk about the landscape and I know I'm using the word a lot, but I feel like it really describes just the overall picture, I think, is what we're looking at. The overall picture of breaks. And this is something where I see a lot of parents pulling their kids out because of bullying. And we kind of already addressed this because I always think bullying in school has always existed. It's always been a thing.
Always been there.
And it's, whether it's different now, we can say that it's more now because of the phones and the technology and all the things. And granted, I don't want to be a kid in school these days, man. Heck
No.
no. That was hard enough as it was when I was growing up. But what is it like on campus with we already talked about lower staff, so we don't have supervision. But what about, like, what are the kids doing with do they have their Chromebooks out, their phones? Are they like sharing stuff? Are they not talking to each other? Are they playing? Are they playing soccer? What are they doing?
Well, you have to take this. I'm not out there,
Right.
but I do have a sense of it. And then the other thing, what's interesting at the school where I'm at now is I'm in what used to be a charter school that kind of is across the street, although it's on the same property. It's not a regular street. So I'm kind of away from all that, which puts me in a weird position. And then because I'm teaching an extra class, if I don't have a class, I'm getting ready for classes because I teach an extra class. So I'm super busy. But in terms of the bullying, I'll go back to that one. That was the first thing you brought up. Yeah, bullying still exists. It's as bad as it's ever been. There's a whole new angle to that, though, because now students can get cyberbullied. And I remember the first time this happened for me was when I was at the other school, and there was some vicious cyberbullying that was happening. And, you think in some ways that's kind of outside of the school space. I think back then, it may have been they didn't even have Chromebooks. I can't remember. It was some number of years ago. But they were bullying a boy on a social media site. And what was happening, kind of out there in that other space, I don't know what you call it, it was coming into the classroom because the kids were commenting and bullying him about what was going on in that cyberspace. And it was really ugly. And eventually they had to call parents in and the students in. And it got to the thing where it definitely was affecting the school climate and the ability of the student to be successful in this environment. So that bullying can take a whole variety of forms. I haven't seen that as much since. It probably does go on. And again, I'm not privy to everything that they see across school wide. The bullying, yeah, it's across the board. And I figure it's different for boys and girls. Boys, it's much more overt. They're going to push kids. They're going to just physically try to intimidate them. And it's interesting. It's across all groups because the newcomers, my newcomers, they used to hang out together. Well, we found it's endemic throughout the newcomer and ELD population too. So it doesn't matter because you used to think like that group got along. They were in all the same classes at the same times all day. Doesn't matter anymore. That doesn't create a stronger bond among them that makes them immune to bullying. And then what they do at break, I think it largely depends on if they're into sports. Sports abound. Soccer is by far and above the most popular thing at our school, but the football is just as popular. And we have a huge fields and blacktop area at our school, so kids can play basketball. So there's lots of sports opportunities, especially the boys. They're really into sports. I'm sure there are girls into sports too. Again, I see mostly boys throughout my day. And then There's other group of kids that they'll gather around a computer or on their computers. They'll all be sitting there with their laptops open, and they're all probably gaming or something. There is a filter at school that's supposed to block out a lot of that stuff. They get around the filter instantly. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a
They're
constant game of
pretty
cat and
smart.
mouse, and they within first period goes by, they've already figured out all the workarounds to get on their favorite games. And then there is the library, which is surprisingly popular, and so kids go in there. Some kids want to work in there.
But
They
they're
have
closing it
puzzles. Yeah, that's the sad
next year.
thing. Yeah, they made this amazing space, and apparently it's full of kids. They have puzzles in there and games, and
Oh
it's
my
just a
gosh.
hangout space. And yeah, because of budget cuts, now they're getting rid of all the
They're
support personnel.
closing the
The
school
school
library
libraries.
people.
Apparently, they're going to be like a skeleton staff that might rotate around. I mean, it's awful. Hopefully, we're hoping it's the type of thing where they scare
Seriously.
everybody and then they bring people back, but we don't know.
Seriously.
Yeah, and and then kids just hang out in the common areas. They hang out in the cafeteria. We did get a cafeteria at the school, so that's nice. And
Yeah, and I definitely don't want I don't want you to feel like school's like the worst place on planet Earth. I
no,
mean, it can be, but it's also there's some good things that are happening too. So let's end on, and I knew we were gonna go overtime today, but that's totally fine. We let's talk about some of the good things. So you talked about sports, and I know that's one of the things that kids go to school for is sports, and one of the things that even homeschoolers want to send our students back to, like high school, because they can participate in high school
yeah.
sports. And so that's something that is, although there are many states in which you can homeschool and participate in high school sports without going
Mm-hmm.
back to school, you have to check your state requirements for that. In California, it is up to the school itself whether they admit you or not. So that is, it's a little tricky, but there are cool things. And you were telling me about some other things like clubs and electives and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, so we'll start with the electives because that's the area that I teach in. A couple of years ago, they decided to change the school schedule. We added a class period. And the idea there, instead of having a 6-period day, the students got a 7th-period day, because we realized even with a 6-period day, students in special programs did not have an elective. So if you were an ELD student, for example, you were in an extra class because newcomers take my class twice. I have them every day, basically. Usually you would have a class every other day. Or they would have an ELD class and an English class. You add PE, you have no room for an elective. And so they added this extra class with the idea that everybody would get an elective. Still, in some cases, if students are like they have a learning disability, a learning plan that requires them to maybe be in a study skills class or support class, we even have kids that don't have an elective because those classes would take the place of it. So it's still not a perfect system. But we added electives. We added a fitness class, which is very popular. Kids that are high energy, it's really great if they can have PE every day, those kids, because they have that physical outlet. We added more of our most popular class, which is farm to table. Who would have thought that
The gardening class.
home ec turned into farm to table. And then those old folks like me have, your shop class turned into Lego robotics or Maker Lab, which we have both. And I went from 2 Lego robotics classes. Now I have 3 and STEM. And so it's a good thing we brought back music in a form, and there's different types of art expression. And so there is a lot more offerings in the elective place, which is really great because you'll often find that kids can pick an elective that aligns with their interests. And then often that's their most favorite class. And
And I
that'll
see
be
that
something I
across
look
the
forward
country.
to.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see that across the country. So I see what's happening is that, and we were talking yesterday about tracks. So leading them down tracks too, where they might be, there's in an old school terms, when I was teaching, it was like a magnet school. So something, you'd have a school that focused on culinary arts, and you have another school that focused on technology. Now it's not so much per school like that, but they have different tracks where they can do that, or different electives at least, where they can try out those things. And it is is a much more, I've even heard of schools being completely like more career focused and just exploring different kinds of careers, that's just like their whole shtick. And so it's interesting to me that they're really trying to bring in a little bit of interest in that way. I think that's a good thing for kids, because that sometimes is that's the reason why they go to school. That
Yeah.
and sports, right? If they're not into sports, that's what they're doing.
And we do have another track at our school. You have to get involved when they get kindergarten level, but they have dual immersion. So these are students, it doesn't matter what your native language is, you're going to end up being bilingual in English and Spanish. Those are our two dominant language groups in our district. And so they start very early in elementary school. And then ideally, if you stick with the program, by the time you graduate high school, you get a seal of biliteracy. It kind of has some clout. And that really widens job opportunities for you. And it looks good on college resumes and that sort of thing. And so that is a separate track. And they do have to take different classes, and it adds a different academic class. So, it is a challenging curriculum. And those students, they end up having to work harder because they have that extra, basically academic class. But that is an offering at our school. And then we do clubs as well. And so there's a whole variety of clubs at our school. There's a club around I don't know how exactly it works. So many teachers at my school, I don't get to talk with everybody. They have a Stranger Things club. I don't know what they do. And I have a Lego robotics and STEM club. And so it's kind of like a free, you could build whatever you want during lunch. Sometimes they just want to build with Legos, general Legos. Other times they're working on robots, working on special projects. And so I have a small but dedicated group. Unfortunately, they're all boys, but they come in once a week, and we have what we call our Lego lunch. And so clubs abound. And at our large school, I'm glad to say, I think there's about 15 clubs.
That's awesome. Yeah. That is Stranger. Yeah. What do they do in Stranger?
I don't know. I don't
They
think
watch
you can
Stranger
watch
Things?
that. No, it's definitely in the
not appropriate
PG,
for
upper PG realm.
But they're all watching it at home. But maybe
I
they're
guess.
creating apps
discussing
or
episodes. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe there's a video game. Who knows? But
Yeah.
anywho, I am super excited about what we talked about today. I know we could keep talking forever, but one of the things I really want to do is I want to make sure that you are just getting information, and we wanted to just give you a little bit of, hey, what's the lay of the land in this day and age with schools. And like I said, a lot of the things we talked about are prevalent throughout the country. So every school's different, every district is different, every teacher is different. I've worked with, and Eric and I have both worked with teachers
Lots
that
of
you were like,
teachers.
oh my gosh, I can't even believe they put them in charge of children. Like,
Yes.
that is not okay. And then we've worked with some incredible, amazing teachers that have taught us so much as well. So it really, and you guys know this already, it's just something you have to investigate yourself and look at what's right for you. And you really have to investigate the school. Every school has a very different culture, and you really have to look at what is happening at that school and go in. It's okay. You actually can go into the classroom. You give the school 24 hours notice, they give the teacher 24 hours notice, and you can go into schools. You can go sit in the classroom. You can see what's happening. And
This used to happen in my classroom, by the way. The parents that were really invested in where their child was going to go, they would come to our school, and then they would come to the other school. And I would literally have parents come and sit in my classroom for an entire period and watch what went on. And the other thing is, I don't know what it's like in other states and other places, but a lot of places are really open to school choice. So there's a lot more opportunities maybe there were in the past to kind of, pick where you're going to go. But with the age of school closures, that's another wrinkle in that thing. Now there isn't a choice where before they could choose their middle.
Yeah, and literally my mom's a retired teacher, and we've talked about this for years. Do not take the score of the school online as anything that shows anything about anything except for that it's their test scores. But you have to, there's good teachers and bad teachers at every school. There's good things and bad things about every school. There's good things and bad things about school in general. I always say homeschooling is a leap of faith. It is a gigantic leap of faith. But so school is a very big leap of faith, because and you have less control there, right? So just think about what's right for your family, and know that in no state in this nation, is it 100% you have to stay there for the whole year, or you're committed to something? You can always try it out, see how it works, go back and forth, whatever you
That's
want.
regular school. Kids come
Yep.
and go all year long.
Yeah, it's just how it goes. So know that just do your homework on both sides. If you have questions about homeschooling, you know who to talk to. You can reach out to me anytime, anywhere at social or email or the website freedomscholar.com. And please, if you resonated with this, first of all, if you know someone who's thinking about homeschooling, might send their kids back to school, just need reassurance about what decision they've made, please send this episode to them and please share it. It only helps all of us when we can share the information out. And then please like and subscribe to this on YouTube. If you're listening to it on the podcast, please go in and leave us a review. And if you leave a written review on Apple and you send me a screenshot of it, a DM, or email it to me, I will send you a free guide of my my guide on inspiring learning 3 foolproof ways to increase level of learning in your home. And it is really something you can use right away. I want to share that with you if you are willing to do that. It just helps. It really does help it get this information out to more people. So I love you guys and I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us again.
Oh,
I can't even believe it's been so many years since
like
we've done
6
this.
years.
It's kind of weird, but
and this all happened on a lark. I said, "Hey, I'm home. I should be on your podcast."
And I was like, "Whoa!"
I'm like, "Whoa, wait, you're agreeing?"
I was like, well, let's do it then. Let's do it. I love it.
That's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Awesome. I will see you guys next week in another episode. Bye-bye.